Marxe Chair of I am the Marxe Chair of Western Hemisphere Affairs and professor here at the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. Today's event is entitled Hurricanes in the Caribbean, Policies to Build Resilience and Address Inequality. Thank you so much for joining us. As you probably heard a few seconds ago, this event is being recorded, so please be aware of that. And also just ask that anyone that is not speaking, please mute your microphones. Annually, hurricanes are a cyclical but ongoing presence in Caribbean life. Over the course of the region's history, it has been struck by hurricanes and other tropical storms annually, leading to great pain, disruption, and destruction. The Northern Caribbean, the subregion that roughly contains Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Bahamas, and Jamaica, is a key pathway for these storms as they make their way from the warm waters of the tropical Atlantic or the southwestern Caribbean to the interior of North America, the colder waters of the North Atlantic, which eventually cause these storms to dissipate. Recent decades have seen remarkable damage to this region from hurricanes that illustrate their ongoing effects on the lives of citizens and the economies of the region. Hurricane Jeanne in 2004 left 3,000 dead in Haiti. In 2008, hundreds were killed in Haiti. 70% of the nation's crops were destroyed as 4 hurricanes hit that country. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy, which most of us here in New York experienced with the city being shut down for a week, and a great deal of other destruction in this general vicinity of the US, killed 2 and did $100 million worth of damage in Jamaica and killed 54 and $750 million worth of damage in Haiti. In 2017, Hurricane Maria left 3,000 dead in Puerto Rico, dealing immense damage to the local economy and generating substantial migration to the mainland of the United States. The same storm killed 65 on the island of Dominica, an island with a population of only 70,000 inhabitants, downing all communication lines and cutting it off from the outside world after pummeling it with 165-mile-an-hour winds. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas with 185-mile-an-hour winds, producing a storm surge 20 to 25 feet above normal tides, killing 70 and doing $3.4 billion worth of damage, leaving 70,000 homeless. This record of destruction, of seasonal destruction from hurricanes and tropical storms leads, of course, to short-term death, injury, and destruction. But these storms have longer-term impacts on shelter, crops, generating famine, job loss, and the expansion and deepening of epidemics, all of which result in concatenating hardships in a storm's aftermath. Amid COVID-19, of course, the fear of epidemics is more acute than usual. The destruction is in some ways the product of natural forces, but it is also the product of human forces and social relationships. Disproportionately, the effect of these storms fall on the poor, excluded, and disadvantaged in the affected societies as a result of them living in the most exposed places in the lower quality housing and without the ability to effectively prepare or evacuate in many cases. Historian Stuart Schwartz has argued that the destruction of hurricanes is a product of human settlement and policy choices that decide how people will live, where they will live, and what actions will be taken to support and protect populations victimized by these events. This is very much true today, and perhaps even more so, in a period when global warming, a product of industrialization and state policies, is creating hotter oceans that produce stronger hurricanes. Globally, the number of Category 4 and 5 storms, the strongest hurricanes, with catastrophic effects and winds over 130 miles/hour are increasing. One study reports that each degree of global warming should generate 25 to 30% more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. Our session today will discuss the impacts of hurricanes on the Caribbean and how it affects different social groups and government, civic, and international efforts to mitigate those effects, the effects of hurricanes today and in the warmer climate change-driven future. We have with us today 2 distinguished speakers. The first is Corel Samuda, She serves as a policy advisor at the Ministry of Finance and Public Service in the government of Jamaica, where she provides policy analysis on a variety of issues, including disaster risk financing, fiscal institutions, and public management. She formerly served as a Jamaica House Fellow for the government of Jamaica, which is the equivalent of a presidential management internship in that country. Corel's research interests draw from the fields of public policy, governance, and international development. Her work to date is on the political economy of public spending, of the spending of members of parliament and their constituencies, and the interactions between African countries, international institutions, and participatory budgeting efforts. Dr. Samuda holds a PhD in public policy from George Mason University and a master's in public policy from Georgetown University. Dr. Jerry Chandler is Director General of the Institution for the Directorate of Civil Protection, which is the government office for emergency and disaster management for the government of Haiti. He was Director of Operations and Medical Director of Haiti Air Ambulance previously, the first air medical operation in Haiti. And he has also served as advisor to the Office of the First Lady of Haiti for health and medical emergency matters. He holds a medical doctor's degree from the University of Notre Dame of Haiti and a specialty degree in surgery from the State University of Medicine and Pharmacy of Haiti. He has also received training at the University of Washington and Texas A&M University. Our roundtable discussion today will begin with the panelists and me having a discussion for about 50 minutes. And after that, we will open the session to the audience, which you can, who can then submit their questions through the chat box. So my first question goes generally to both panelists, is about the general impacts of hurricanes on the Caribbean. I wanted to start with Dr. Chandler and ask Dr. Chandler to discuss the recent effects of hurricanes on Haiti in terms of human and economic costs.
Thank you very much, Desmond. Thank you for that very good introduction, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be online with you all to discuss a topic that is very actual and that is very dear to us in Haiti. As you have clearly mentioned in your introduction, we in the Caribbean are on the path of hurricanes, and it is a recurrent theme on a yearly basis that we have to deal with. I think you also mentioned of few instances where we've had impacts of hurricanes in Haiti, and one of the most I would say, I would add in terms of details that you talked about 2008 when we were struck by 4 hurricanes. I would only add that all of those hurricanes caused a total loss estimated at 15% of the GDP for that year alone. I would also like to put an emphasis on the 2016 hurricane Matthew that hit Haiti as a Category 4. It literally went through the southern peninsula and wiped it out. Literally, it ended up causing 175 people being displaced, 175,000 people being displaced, 1.4 million people requiring assistance, and 2.7 billion US dollars in terms of damage. So again, this is just to emphasize on the various points that you made in your introduction. And yes, those hurricanes, these natural disasters, do represent a huge toll on our economy and our livelihood here in the Caribbean. And as you just said, it is a recurrent theme, and it is something that it has to be a priority and that we are trying to tackle and address. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. Dr. Samuda, could you elaborate on the effects of hurricanes in recent years and historically on Jamaica?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Professor Arias. I'm looking forward to the dialogue this afternoon. But as Dr. Chandler said, we are particularly vulnerable in Jamaica and our sister countries in the region to the impacts of hurricane. For Jamaica, our they say our active hurricane season usually starts June 1st to November 30th. That's when we experience the most activity with respect to hurricanes and other related activities associated with hurricanes, flooding, for example. I can speak to historically, for 1988 Hurricane Gilbert landfall, I think was in September 12, 1988, remains as one of our most damaging and deadly hurricanes. I know there was one in 1951 prior, which was most deadly, Hurricane Charlie. But in recent memories, or 1988 Hurricane Gilbert is very damaging. According to our Planning Institute of Jamaica, in one of its assessments of the impacts, that it cost us about 26% of our GDP, the damage experience. That's a huge blow. More than 500,000 people were displaced, were homeless. And then the damage, another set of costs associated, said that it cost us about $1 billion in terms of damage. So, you know, the damage was so severe that a 1 month state of public emergency was actually declared for most of our eastern part of Jamaica, just to help with the displacement, to deal with the flooding, the lack of housing and all of that. And then in more recent memory, it was a hurricane, then it became a tropical storm, Elsa, which also caused significant damage to our roads and our coastal communities, with a damage and loss tag of about $5 million. We have various studies have shown that sort of annual average damage and loss from floods, hurricanes, and drought cost Jamaica on average between 0.9 to 1.3% of GDP. So we really are economically and physically and socially impacted. There's another thing I wanted to quickly talk about. I know we're focusing on hurricanes, but there are these other weather-related systems like tropical cyclones that sometimes don't necessarily make the headlines, the global news, but they occur and they cause significant damage to our infrastructure, to households, to livelihoods. So in the late 2020, October, November, actually, we experienced 2 tropical cyclones almost back to back, tropical cyclone Zeta and Eta. And the significant damage that we experienced was enough to trigger a payout from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. So there are these other systems, weather-related systems that occur, as I said, that they may not make the news, they may not be the category 4 or 5 hurricane, but they exist and they do wreak a lot of damage on our systems.
And I wanted to ask now, how are hurricanes? So one of the things that comes up with hurricanes is the issue of the way in which hurricanes differentially affect different social classes and groups. Thinking about the countries that you work in, how do hurricanes particularly burden the poor, the working class, people who are otherwise socially excluded? I wanted to start this question with you, Dr. Samuda.
Absolutely. Our vulnerable populations are disproportionately impacted. When we think of, for example, households, for Jamaica, a lot of our vulnerability lies along our coast, right? Households who live close to the coast or who are engaged in economic activities related to fisheries, so on, right? So the majority of our population, actually about 60%, they live in communities within 5 kilometers of the coast. So you can understand when we experience hurricane and other weather-related events, that the displacement of people living in these areas and other flood-prone areas is significant, and those tend to be persons in our lower income quartiles. You think of the loss of income and the sources of income. Agriculture, that's one of our largest employers for rural Jamaicans. That's one of the first sectors to be negatively impacted. We even think of tourism too. That's also negatively impacted. It's a huge employer, particularly for low semi-skilled individuals. So when sectors such as those come to a virtual halt, sometimes due to hurricanes, immediately the issue of vulnerability is important.
Mhm. And Dr. Chandler, could you address the same question of the disproportionate impacts of hurricanes on disadvantaged populations in Haiti?
Absolutely, absolutely. And, just to, because I think Dr. Samuda made a
Yes, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with Dr. Chandler's internet. Um, let's just give it a second to see if it catches up. Wow, so we may have, uh,
apologies, I was interrupted.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yes, go ahead,
Yes.
Dr. Chandler.
Yes, so I was saying that especially I wanted to put an emphasis on disadvantaged groups and especially the most vulnerable. I'm talking about women, women with children, the disabled, the elderly, that already in the normal setting have a lot of trouble, getting their livelihood together. So when they are impacted, it becomes even more difficult for them to actually get humanitarian assistance, fall on their feet, quote unquote, and then get back to a normal setting. So right now, the point right now is to actually address these specific populations and try to increase and enhance resilience for them and have them as a priority in terms of actions, in terms of planning, so we can be sure that we lessen the impact of these disasters on them. But I think, like I said, Dr. Samuda made a very clear point about the general impact of the disasters on the sectors, and from a financial standpoint, it can be catastrophic. For the various sectors that are operational, that keep the population going and that bring money inside of the country. In our case, we're talking about agriculture and cattle, and all of these. When you talk about hurricanes, those are the first areas that are impacted and that need to be addressed, so we can get back to quote unquote some form of normalcy. So again, those are the big challenges, and again, the disadvantaged groups have to be part of our priorities. Over.
So, Dr. Chandler, I just wanted to follow up on this one point. You said that one of the first things that the government seeks to address is farming and ranching in the post-hurricane period in Haiti. Why is farming and ranching such a critical area for recovery?
Well, I would make a quick correction. It's not necessarily the first area that's being addressed, but it is one of the areas that is a priority for the recovery phase, because as you know, the disaster cycle, you have the first response, and then and so forth and so on until you get to the recovery. But again, farming and agriculture are one of the pillars of the economy of Haiti. And as you know, we have a system that is already very weak, and we do not have a lot of, I would say, vegetal coverage. So those are areas, those are sectors that are already vulnerable and weak, but they literally constitute the piggy bank of the people. So basically, if you want to get the people back on their feet, these are the areas that need to be addressed. And when we talk about hurricanes, we're talking about winds, 140, 150 miles per hour winds. It wipes out all of that capacity. So again, those are the priorities that this area becomes a priority, because this is something that you need to address ASAP, so you can give the people, get the people back on their feet.
So I wanted to follow up again, because you said something interesting just now that I think can help our audience also understand some of the challenges that Haiti faces, which is the idea of forest cover. So I'm from Miami, so hurricanes loomed large in my mind when I was growing up. And one of the problems we have in Miami is how many large buildings have been built immediately on the coast, right? How much of the the sand dunes on the beaches have become denuded in the way in which that exposes society in that city to hurricanes. The problem in Jamaica is a little, not in Jamaica, in Haiti is a little bit different in terms of deforestation. Could you talk about the implications of deforestation for the safety of the population in Haiti during tropical storms and hurricanes?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it is a very important question that I probably I didn't insist on, but the problem remains the fact that we have a vegetal cover that is less than 10% what it of the total surface. That means simply that we do not have enough trees to hold the soil. So when it rains, the rain drains all the good soil, and it goes down to the rivers and to the riverbeds, and it goes down to the cities, and it creates floods, and it impacts negatively, all of the environment. And the more you have deforestation, the more this process is accelerated, which is our case in Haiti. And the source and the explanation for this is, of course, the financial resources that are very weak, and people tend to cut the trees that they find so they could make charcoal so they could sell. So again, it becomes like it becomes a chain. It becomes you plant trees, they cut trees, and so forth and so on. So right now we have to be able to break that cycle, so we give those people the livelihood that they need, so they can actually, let the agriculture become what it needs to be. Haiti is a very mountainous country, but Haiti used to be, agriculture used to be our main source of income. So, and there is a potential for it. As you know, we are in the Caribbean. We have sun, all year round, and we have more or less of a good weather, and except for those big storms that we're talking about. So the idea is to be able to capitalize on that. But in order to be able to capitalize on it, we need to address the problem at its base and at where it stems from. And we talked about vulnerable groups, but the vulnerability is at the financial level. So that would lead the discussion towards something more structural. We would be talking about finances. We would be talking about projection for development of the country, and so forth and so on. And this is what's beautiful about disaster management. Disaster management can be a vector for development. If we invest where we need to invest, and we will talk about that a bit later when we talk about the policies that we're trying to implement. If we invest where we need to invest, then yes, we can bring that cycle over.
So this is a good inflection point to begin talking about policy responses. And I wanted to ask, I wanted to ask Dr. Samuda, amid global warming and the potential for more powerful and frequent hurricanes, how are countries in the Caribbean preparing for hurricanes today and in the future? Dr. Samuda?
Sure, thank you. So, Jamaica has always been very active in advancing policies that address climate change, address or disaster risk management. I'm going to speak specifically to what the Ministry of Finance is doing. That's what I've been working on, but I will speak, I'll mention it within the context that disaster risk management is a key strategic priority of the government, and different ministries with different responsibilities are also working on the issue. Particularly for the Ministry of Finance, we've been really focused the last 2 years or so on the risk of disaster risk financing, the fiscal impact, and how to sort of better manage it. What has happened previously is that once there is a hurricane or a natural hazard, that we shift around budgetary allocations to focus on financing the recovery process. That it's not sustainable. Firstly, second, it contributes greatly to sort of our debt profile. And recently, Jamaica has been engaged in a series of fiscal policies to maintain or to reach a debt target in a few years. So sort of trying to understand how we deal with the fiscal risks associated with natural disasters is something that has been front and center. There are two things that we're doing. One, we are now in the process of devising our disaster risk financing policy. And within that policy, sort of one of the main approaches that we're taking is using a multi-layered approach in terms of procuring or getting financial products to help with the different sort of severity and frequency of natural disasters, including hurricanes. So one level, what I call it sort of at the bottom level of that multi-layered approach is that we do still, and we've always done that, is that we do provide budgetary allocation in our annual and sometimes supplementary budgets to enable a response to the disasters. In 2019, however, we went beyond that traditional approach and actually capitalized what we have is called a contingencies fund, which was created, and it's a creature of our constitution, and it was included in the constitution for the funding or the monies allocated to be used for natural disasters, natural hazards. And since 2019, we've been actively increasing the size of that contingencies fund to deal with natural disasters. We did an initial allocation of about $27 million to that fund, and for subsequent years we'll be adding to our contingencies fund. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, I guess the layer above is that we've now entered with the Inter-American Development Bank a contingent credit claim of about $285 million, which means in the event of a hurricane catastrophe, we'll have easy access to that funding source without having to sort of engage in the time-consuming process of negotiating a product with our multilateral banks. That's already there and will be triggered during a hurricane event. And then, in addition, sort of on that layer, we've continued our renewed our insurance with the Caribbean Catastrophe Insurance Facility, which will provide up to about $81 million of coverage against hurricanes and other damage associated. Coverage of earthquakes at about $125 million and about $31 million of coverage against excess rainfall. That's with our Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility. And then what we've done recently is initiated or launched a catastrophe bond, which really transfers catastrophic natural disaster risk from the sponsor, the country, to our international capital markets. And that was recently launched this year for this active hurricane year. So sort of this kind of multi-layered approach, it allows us to have different financing products to deal with the different sort of types of natural hazards, severity of and damage of a hurricane, for example. And then what it does too, because we've now put in place this sort of ex-ante approach to disaster risk financing, that it allows us to use budgetary allocations to focus on priority areas. So we don't have to immediately shift budgets to dealing with the damage and cost of hurricanes. But now then we can focus on building resilience. We can apply those freed up funds to deal with other issues. So that's sort of one of the most concrete things, policies and strategies that, particularly within the Ministry of Finance, we've been pursuing to mitigate the effects of a hurricane. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, just to follow up, when you say that by kind of shifting around how you finance recovery, you can more efficiently support people in times of emergency, but also use the resources better to build resilience. When the government of Jamaica is thinking about building resilience in Jamaica, hurricane resilience in Jamaica, what does that look like? Like, what are the concrete policies that focus on producing resilience there?
Good question. So as I said, from the perspective of the Ministry of Finance, we're building fiscal resilience to the impact of hurricanes. I know our Ministry of Local Government and Community Development they've been working closely to bolster their emergency response, and also to deal with sort of the long-term structural issues with respect to housing vulnerability, having to think of communities that lie within flood-prone areas that may need to be relocated. I know there's been a lot of discussion around that. We are dealing with relocation of flood-prone, disaster-prone communities. I know, for example, we have been exploring building climate risk analysis in our public investment management programs. So when we engage in large infrastructure programs, for example, in leading up to the development of the project, the process, that a climate risk analysis is included. And that allows us to determine whether the project, a major infrastructure investment project, sort of meets or minimum standards of climate resilience. And then there are others. I know, again, in our Ministry of Housing, Environment, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, they've engaged. I know we've spoken about reforestation. Jamaica also now has a reforestation program to increase our forest cover, to strengthen our mangroves, which play a very important role with respect to flooding and so on. So there are a lot of things happening in the other ministries and agencies responsible for that.
Thank you, Dr. Samuda. And so now I'd like to turn this question over to you, Dr. Chandler, and in particular ask, one, what is the government of Haiti doing to respond to and to prepare for hurricanes as hurricanes become more intense, both today and as hurricanes become more intense? And I'm particularly curious about something you said in your last response, which is that effective disaster response can also be a tool for development, right? So I'm interested in hearing about how the government of Haiti is responding and how that is a part of the process of development in Haiti.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I would like to make a little precision. In fact, it's not just effective response, it's actually good preparation that can be a key or a motor towards development, because the idea is to be able to work towards the resilience. And in order to work towards the resilience, you need to work, like I said, within the structures. You have to address the structural issues, agriculture, livelihood, and so forth and so on, so we can be sure that we lessen the impact of these unfortunate events on the population. So in order to do this, the Haitian government has been making efforts in recent times, so we can actually increase our capacity, not just for response, but also for preparation and mitigation. And in that vein, I can tell you that there are two main things that have, two main accomplishments. The first one has been a law strengthening the disaster risk reduction structure in Haiti. So the institution that I lead, the Civil Protection, which is the executive body of the government for preparedness and response in terms of disaster and emergency. Well, this institution was a small division of the Ministry of Interior. So they have passed a law in 2020 where they popped us up to be a Directorate General. What does that mean? It means simply that we become autonomous and we have more capacity to act and to interact with our partners, local and international, so we can first do response, second work in terms of preparedness and mitigation. So that's the first thing. The second good thing is also what we call the National Strategic Plan for Disaster Management, which is a 10-year plan that has been that we have worked on and that has been validated at the ministerial level. So that plan gives us the way and tells us what to do in the next 10 years. It's a 2020 to 2030 plan, which leads and orients all the efforts, the investments, and what we need to do in terms of capacity building, so we can have a more resilient or a more resilient system. So within that plan, what we can do is actually orient our partners, local and international, in terms of investment, in terms of efforts, and And our role is to actually coordinate all of those efforts, making sure that we do not have duplication of efforts, making sure that the resources are being used, in a thorough manner, so we can indeed, attain those objectives. So there is also the possibility, the fact that we as Protection Civil now have the capacity to be able to deal bilaterally with partners, financial partners. We're talking about World Bank, IDB, and so forth and so on. And that, I think Dr. Samuda talked about the Caribbean Insurance Fund, the CRIF. Well, we have been working with the CRIF, and they have been, increasing our capacity or portfolio, if I may call it like that, so we can benefit from, this insurance mechanism when we get struck by disasters, whether it be hurricanes or earthquakes. So all in all, I mean, those are the big lines of what we've been doing, and we've also been doing a lot of capacity building locally. I mean, on the ground. You certainly know that we have been struck by an earthquake, August 14th, and thank God we had this program where we did a refresher courses for our volunteers, so we could make sure that everyone was, up to speed in terms of response. So they were, and they actually responded. I mean, the first 48 hours of response was completely Haitian. We were there, our teams were there, and when I say our teams, I'm talking about the local teams in the affected area, because we could not get there, for multiple reasons. So again, this is to tell you that yes, there have been efforts. There's a lot that remains to be done, and I think that, but I think we are on a good track now. I think what the most important thing is to go from words to action. Right now, we have to take the time and make sure to use that framework that is created, so we can make meaningful and impact-driven actions, so we can get results and be better prepared, and so we can better mitigate. Because as you know, the famous quote saying that for $1 spent in preparedness, you save $7 in response. So it is especially true here in Haiti, because as you know, the needs are they are immense, and the vulnerability is very, 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 very big. Over.
So I wanted to kind of follow up on that last point, Dr. Chandler, and push a little bit more on the specific responses for vulnerable populations, right, to address inequalities in society and the disparate impacts of hurricanes on the less well-off in Haitian society, and then in Jamaican society when I talked to Dr. Samuda. So if you could talk a little bit more about the specific government responses directed towards excluded, disadvantaged, and vulnerable populations, I think that would be really great.
Yes, absolutely. And I can say that the whole point about it right now is to actually make sure that those vulnerable populations remain the priority in the agenda, because a lot of times we tend to go and do what we call blanket response. You just go around, you do basic things, and making sure that everyone is quote unquote covered, so you can make sure that you don't have that backlash of this discontentment. But once you do that, you have to be able to address and really act upon those vulnerable groups. And I can tell you, for instance, in the response to the August 14 earthquake, one of the projects that we have piloted we've been piloting it for the past 2 weeks, and we have been leading the effort and making sure that all the partners join in, is, for instance, having specific targeted shelter solutions for vulnerable families. Let me give you a clear, simple example. We did have that earthquake. A lot of people were, displaced, and they were out, living in makeshift, literally, conditions. So what we did, we made a sampling. We made some research and made a sampling, and we started offering specific alternative solutions for sheltering. I'm talking about tents, but more, better suited tents for instance, single mom families, for instance, large families with a lot of kids, for instance, families with people that are amputated, and so forth and so on. So we can lead the way and show our partners that this is where the priority needs to be. Once we cover those, then we can address, the rest. in recent years, there has been an emphasis from the government side for the, these groups. We do have a ministry for feminine affairs. We do have a ministry for handicapped people. So all of these ministries are part of the national disaster management system, and they work closely with us. So they make sure that those needs are not left behind. And even if we would tend to forget, or we would be distracted by, other priorities, quote unquote, they make sure they reel us in so we can, include these vulnerable populations, vulnerable groups in what is being done. So again, I could go on with many examples, but yes, there is this need exists. There are solutions that are being put to work for it, but we also need to keep making more efforts in making sure that we address those vulnerable groups. Over.
And Dr. Samuda, in Jamaica, how's the government preparing to address the needs of vulnerable groups in hurricanes?
Thanks. I do want to underscore what Dr. Chandler mentioned. Just first of all, ensuring that our vulnerable populations still remain front and center in the response to a natural disaster such as a hurricane. I know in Jamaica, so the PM, when he launched the National Hurricane Preparedness Campaign for the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, he ensured and made note that some of the priority areas under that campaign, one of them was including readiness of shelter and shelter operations, and ensuring that issues such as accessibility and dealing with the special needs of women remain a priority and are part of the planning process for the readiness of our shelters. I know through the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development that local disaster committees are now being strengthened to really focus on vulnerable populations in the response, the emergence or the post-hurricane emergency response. There's another area that I wanted to talk about too, and that is also something that the Ministry of Finance has really been focusing on. And it's really been activated during our COVID-19 response, but we do see it as a type of a blueprint, if you will, moving forward in response to any sort of natural hazard. And it really is a strengthening of our social protection ecosystem. One of the things that we've done in response to COVID-19 is that we've made additional cash grants available to households who are on Jamaica's conditional cash transfer program called Program of Advancement Through Health and Education, called PATH. So it's sort of an income-based cash transfer program. And one of the things that we've done in response to COVID-19 is increase the number of grants that families who are households that are part of that program receive. But in addition to that, we've done other things such as we launched a temporary cash transfer program using a digital platform. And it really, there were various elements of it, and one element sort of did target or low-income families and families in vulnerable situations. And we see sort of being able to administer something like that digitally, sort of rather quickly, presents an area of future opportunity as we deal with emergency response. And we also made various allocations to feeding programs, whether through the members of parliament or through our local government infrastructure. So food packages and other care packages were made available. And those are the type of things that were already done in the event of a hurricane, but we see sort of the more structural and strategic approach of strengthening our social protection system as something to move forward when we address the issue of vulnerability due to hurricanes.
So thank you, Dr. Samuda. I wanted to, we're kind of coming to the end of the question and answer of the conversation between the panel participants and I would like to offer a friendly reminder to the guests, the audience, that you can add questions for the panelists in the chat box, and I will begin asking those soon. One issue that I want to discuss with the two of you before we get to that is an issue that has come up a lot, which is the role of international cooperation in addressing hurricane mitigation, hurricane resilience, and preparedness. And I want to kind of put this out there in 3 or 4 ways, and you can address it as you see fit. So the first question is, so what role does international cooperation play in addressing hurricanes in terms of partnerships with other countries, donor countries in some cases, international institutions such as the IDB, the World Bank, those types of organizations, the UN. In particular, what role does CARICOM and inter-Caribbean relationships play in preparedness? And lastly, how does this all fit into the puzzle of climate change, right? Which is really a global debate about which, you know, we're going to have a big global meeting on this in Scotland soon. So I'll put this first to Dr. Samuda and then turn to Dr. Chandler.
Thank you for that. Absolutely, international cooperation or multilateral approach to preparedness and then also sort of the larger climate change issue is critical. Climate change, it's a global issue. We can't. It's not something that is unique to Jamaica or unique to Haiti, for example. So, sort of being involved and being at the table with international partners, bilaterally and at the multilateral stage is important. I know for us in Jamaica, sort of the role of partners such as the World Bank, they were very important, and the IDB were very critical in developing our disaster risk financing strategy. You know, the utilization of their knowledge capacity helped in creating these products. Some of them have actually, for example, a catastrophe bond. They have features that are unique. They weren't sort of done before, but through our engagement with them, that we were able to tailor financial products to sort of the impact and how we feel and experience on hurricanes. I know, for example, governments such as the United Kingdom and Germany and the US, they also have played a role in supporting the premium payment for catastrophe bonds. So definitely engaging in cooperation at the international level, whether it's with countries or with the multilateral system is important. I know from the perspective, and we're leading up to COP26, it's supposed to start, I think, the end of this week, that CARICOM in general, and from a regional perspective, we've been vocal at the table, sort of advocating for the need for sort of ambitious climate action, because for small island developing states such as ours, you know, it's a reality, you know, rising sea levels, increasing the temperature. We are feeling the effects, you know, from a hurricane perspective, the severity and the frequency of those systems are being felt, on the ground and for months and years after. So I know CARICOM has really been active at the negotiating table, and we're looking forward to their voice continuing to be heard and for them to continue voicing on behalf of member countries why it's important for climate action, and then sort of the offshoots of climate change to be front and center of the negotiations moving forward.
Dr. Chandler?
Yes, absolutely. I think Dr. Samuda painted a picture that is, applicable to not just Jamaica, but to, Caribbean in general. I just want to add that international relations are critical and are key to, the future of disaster risk reduction. And certainly, you certainly know that the theme for the disaster risk reduction day this year, it was on October 13, and the theme was about international relationships. So the theme was about strengthening our international relationship, getting together so we can fight together, towards, into finding solutions, in regards to not to all these natural disasters that are striking. And again, the point remains that you cannot fight the disasters; you have to be ready for them. So again, this is a whole conversation. And again, we think that yes, there is a lot of room and opportunities for international relationships. For instance, we do have support from the big donors, World Bank, IDB, and certain what you call technical and financial partners from various governments, international governments. But we also like to put front and forward the South-South relationship. What we call South-South is, the direct help that we can give to each other. And I must salute the cooperation and the collaboration that Jamaica has given us in the response for the recent earthquake. And we've had, they had a team coming down on behalf of CIVIMA, and we got some good work done. And again, in regards to the CARICOM, as we do have an instrument inside of the CARICOM that's called CIVIMA, which is the disaster management institution that that binds all of the to speak for us as one voice. So this institution has been making strides and has been making a tremendous job. For instance, right now in Haiti, on top of helping us and assisting us in terms of response, we also work on projects so we can do mitigation, do preparation, preposition goods, and so forth and so on. So again, all in all, in the big scheme of things, if we're talking about international relationship, the whole point right now is making sure that internally, as a government, you know where you want to go and you know what you need. That's for one. Second, you need to be able to foster the conversations towards your needs. And again, it doesn't need to be an aggressive conversation. It's just that, hey, this is where we want to go. This is how we want to do it. You have the means, I have the will, and I know what I want to do. So let's get together to get it going. So we start project, we measure impacts, we stop, and then we repeat. And that's more or less what international relations need to gear towards. Of course, it's not it's not white or black. It's a big variety of gray. And as you know, navigating inside of this complex universe can be sometimes very challenging. But then again, I think it is very important, and I think it is the key right now to foster and making sure that international relations are put forward, because we do have to keep in mind that the resources are becoming more and more scarce, and we, as globally speaking, the resources are becoming scarce, and we do have to make sure that we manage the few resources that we have correctly, so we can actually have results. So again, the same thing I said before: go from words to actions. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. So I'm now going to begin asking questions from the chat box, but I would like to remind the guests, the audience in our roundtable, that they can submit questions to the chat box, which I will, time permitting, ask of the panelists. The first question comes from Gabor Markey, and it is about the role of technology transfer in responding to climate change. So not climate change, the role of technology transfer in responding to hurricanes. He writes, why not increase technology transfer? Talking about hurricanes, the consequences of energy security and sustainability are important issues. And he believes that this has had an effect in Dominican Republic, where he has worked. So I'll put this first to Dr. Samuda, and then turn the question to Dr. Chandler after that.
Hi, thank you for that question. No, that's absolutely important. It's not sort of firmly within my area of work, but I do know that our Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, they have raised as an area of strategic importance, number one, sort of our energy security issue, diversifying our energy sources for one, particularly looking at the role that solar energy can play. And particularly with respect to in our emergency response efforts. So that's something being done. I'm not fully apprised of the details, but I can say that diversifying our energy sources currently is sort of one of the priority areas for the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology in Jamaica.
Mhm. Thank you, Dr. Samuda. Dr. Chandler?
Yes, absolutely. And I think adding to what Dr. Samuda said, technology transfer needs to be, I mean, it is key. And again, we personally, as a director of protection civil, which, is operational on the field in terms of prevention and response, we have to we have to stay current in terms of technology. But the real issue to this is to make sure that we do not go too fast. And again, when I say go too fast, it goes back to what I said before. It needs to be part of a global plan. If everything else is not following, it's not going to work. Let me give you a simple example. We have an early warning system that we have been trying to implement for the longest time. But for some reason, it does not work because, again, we do not have the infrastructure that is needed to actually be doing weather surveillance. So we do not have we lack some of the components, electricity, for instance. So when you do have weather stations that are scattered around the place, and you have about 100 weather stations, and only have 20 of them that are functioning because most of the places where you put those weather stations do not have electricity, then you have a problem. So you can big jump in terms of technology transfer, but in reality, from a practical perspective, it's not, the impact that you would want to have is not attained. So yes, we do have to work on that. For instance, right now we are working on an early warning system on cell phones, for instance, which is a very sophisticated and advanced system right now in Haiti. But can we actually do it? And is how, what is going to be the impact if the people cannot charge their phones because we do not have electricity? So again, those are the questions that need to be asked. And again, the real answer to this is that the technology transfer needs to be done, but it needs to be done within a general plan where it goes, it has to flow with everything else. So you cannot have technology if you don't have the basics, and technology is never going to work if the population doesn't have the basics. So again, yes, technology transfer is important, but we need to be mindful of how we do it and how we incorporate it inside of the bigger scheme of things. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. So the next question comes from Franklin Martin, who asks, faced with the phenomenon of banditry linked to the rise of insecurity, this has become a major challenge to emergency response in Haiti. How can we imagine a solution to this problem that takes a solution to disaster risk management that takes into account the phenomena of order and public safety into these responses amid the control of the power of gangs, which is right now getting a tremendous amount of attention in Haiti, which is why I put it to Dr. Chandler first, but is also an issue which I have researched somewhat in Haiti, in Jamaica. So I will make sure to get back to Dr. Samuda on this after Dr. Chandler responds.
Yes, absolutely. We are currently faced with a very intense, and when I say intense, the scope and the scope of the insecurity right now has reached a threshold that has never been seen before, and it has been crippling or humanitarian response efforts, for instance, in the August 14 earthquake. So what we have been doing, we have been looking for and trying to find alternative solutions around this problem. We have used helicopter transport, for instance. We are using boat, the maritime way, for instance. I mean, those are what I call substitutes for a problem that is real. So we're literally band-aiding a problem that needs surgery, literally. So what is the solution? There is no specific solution in the sense that from a disaster management perspective, the solution is not from us specifically, but again, like I said before, it has to be part of the greater scheme of things. If we do use and implement those programs, those projects that can actually help increase the livelihood, help the people, have better, more income and have a better situations, then this would certainly impact positively the people that are involved in this type of activities. And at the end, ripple effect, you would have less of this. So again, it's part of the plan. It has to be part of a plan, and it has to be part of, it has to also be part of political decisions to actually implement those plans. Disaster risk management, for instance, the plain and simple example is that we have implemented some what you call specific short-term projects where you do cash for work. The person comes, he works, you pay him, and then that's it. So those have brought some results. Yes, you get peace for in a specific region for a very short period of time, and you also address the disaster issue. For instance, if you get the people to actually work and clean a waterbed or a riverway, so it lessens the flooding that could ensue from rains, then it's good. But it should not stop there. That is a band-aid to a bigger problem. It needs, we need to have work done on the whole system, on the whole city, and have that work be part of, like I said, the global plan, so you can have an impact, we have a real impact of the disaster risk disaster risk management system as part of the development, can be a motor for the development of the country. Over.
Okay, and just again, a reminder to the audience, please submit your questions to the chat box if you have any. Dr. Samuda, Jamaica has historical issues with gangs and criminal violence. How does that come into play in discussions of disaster management and hurricane preparedness in Jamaica?
Well, that's an interesting question. Security is still a challenge for us in Jamaica. But I think there was one point that Dr. Chandler said that I think is important. Is when you think of the issue of security, that you focus on those structural issues. How is it that even up to or prior to a natural disaster, how is it that we're increasing the incomes and the livelihoods of households that would be most affected, and that can create sort of this ripple effect in minimizing the role or minimizing the security challenges that many of us would face. I know for us, one of the things in our emergency response that we do utilize our army or military to help sort of with the logistics. So there's that from the provision of a security perspective that occurs. And I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about, sort of minimizing loss, minimizing banditry, that role, that technology transfer, that utilization of, say, digital platforms to help with the transfer, for example, of resources, of financial support to communities and households who are impacted, sort of minimizes or helps with the transparency, accountability, and minimizes sort of the physical aspect of having cash and all and those things. So I think sort of leveraging in the future, leveraging technology, digital platforms to help with the transfer of particularly financial resources is something that can be used to address that. But I think, as Dr. Chandler said, sort of the core part of it is prior to the advent of not that we can predict, but sort of helping to improve the livelihood and sources of income of those impacted seems to be a good way to start to deal with some of these security challenges.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samuda. So the next question we have is from Lindsay McCormack, who writes, I would love to hear from Dr. Chandler and Samuda about how UN agencies involved in disaster preparedness and response, such as UNDRR and the OCHA, could improve the support for national disaster risk and reduction efforts. So I'll put this first to you, Dr. Samuda.
Well, I think so. What has been happening, particularly with a lot of our multilateral agencies, is that they've now been spending a lot more time in listening to what countries such as Jamaica, developing countries, want with respect to products, tools, support. As I said, with respect to our approach to disaster risk financing, this was something that the government of Jamaica, the people of Jamaica, sort of realized that was something that was most efficient for us to do. And because of sort of the domestic ownership of something like that, when engaged in discussions and conversations with our partners, including UN agencies, they were able to utilize their resources to respond to what we wanted. So in terms of improving, I think spending a lot more time listening to what developing countries are proposing as what they see as effective responses, and then offering resources and tools to enhance, to implement those strategies, those policies. I think it's where sort of most of the gains can be had. And then for sort of also from the global level, really advocating for the need, and I'm talking about with respect to climate change, but advocating for decisive and bold climate action to help address many of the effects, the impacts that small island developing states are experiencing.
Thank you, Dr. Samuda. Dr. Chandler, I wanted to put the same question to you about the role of the UN.
Yes, absolutely. And the UN has been a big partner of us here in Haiti, the disaster management system. And I want to, I'm happy that this question came up because it gives me the opportunity to highlight the role of the UN in all the work that I've mentioned before in terms of strengthening policy and strategic planning for us. They have been partners with us and they have helped us pushing and advocating to bring Protection Civil to become a Directorate General. They have worked with us on the thematic of the strategic plan that was drafted and that was submitted. And they also, as Dr. Samuda said, they also are very attentive. They are very open to discussions and to listening to what the real needs are in order to actually help us move forward. And in terms of so we've had a more and more present participation of institutions like UNDRR, which is very strategic in terms of how to work on policies and work do advocacy and so forth and so on. So in addition to all of these implementing agencies such as WFP, IOM, and UNICEF that are on the ground and that are actually helping with more, I would say, hands-on type of action, more in terms of response. And even those agencies that I just mentioned are very much involved right now in mitigation plans, in projects that assist and help in terms of mitigation. So right now, the real challenge in regards to the UN agencies at large is really making sure that we align their work and we coordinate, making sure that they don't overstep one another, and that the actions that are undertaken, they make sense and they go towards the results for that plan that we have, so we can work in unison. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. So I will again remind the audience that you can add questions to the chat box. We're getting sort of towards the end of our time, but we have time for probably a couple more questions. The next question comes from Laura St. Jean, who asks, in 2010, Chile experienced an 8.8 magnitude earthquake about a month after Haiti's 7.0 magnitude earthquake. While there was damage for both, Chile, with the higher temblor, reported less loss of life and infrastructure damage than did Haiti. What lessons can be gleaned from this? I'll put this question first to Dr. Chandler.
Well, the question is very interesting in the sense that there is the comparison between Chile and Haiti can be I don't know, it's not exactly the way to address the problem. I would just say this: disaster risk management is a very new science to Haiti. We've been developing the disaster management system since 2000, so we're barely 20-ish years old. That's for one. Even though we've had the Red Cross and the Haitian Army and all these bodies that were taking care of disaster management and especially response before. So the real trend to actually talk about DRR started in the year 2000, but we were not very accustomed to earthquakes. It was more about hurricanes and floods and mudslides and so forth and so on. So 2010 was literally a big surprise. That's for one. Second, in terms of infrastructure, structurally speaking, Haiti, where it happened in a very, in an urban area and in, in the capital. So the impact was enormous. That's for one. Second, Chile already had a culture of earthquakes. That's for one. Second, Chile has had infrastructures put in place so they could, quote unquote, lessen the impact of this type of disasters on their system. That being said, the lesson to be learned is something is working there that was not working here. So we have been having exchanges, and we've been working closely with the Chilean government and with the Chilean civil defense, so we can have this type of bilateral cooperation where they can help us, with their experience, teach us what they know. For instance, they started helping us train a urban search and rescue team, because you certainly know that Chile is the #2 in terms of urban search and rescue in the Americas. They have a huge capacity. They're set up for it, and they have invested in it. So again, those are the things that we tend to look at, and we have, like I said, we've been having exchanges. We've been having Chilean instructors come down to actually train search and rescue. We've also worked on. We also taken the example of what they call the CERT, the CERT, the Community Emergency Response Teams that they do have. So right now we are developing that same concept where we can have the, how would I say, the community response. When I say lowest level in terms of capacity or in terms of specialty, but it means that you have people inside of the community that are ready to respond in case of a disaster. So again, those are the lessons that we're learning from Chile, and we've been having exchanges with them. And like I said, there is a dynamic that is installed. And right now, what we're trying to do in Protection Civil is trying to get the best of both worlds. We do take lessons from Chile, from the US, from the French, recently we had Norwegians come down for disaster response. So right now, what we're trying to build the Haitian disaster management system, which would stem, I would say, which would take the best of all the worlds, not the best of both worlds, but all the worlds of all the, those various countries that we interact with, so we can actually build and reinforce our system. It's a long road. We still have a lot to do, but the dynamic is already engaged, and we're moving forward. Over.
So I wanted to follow up on one point that you just mentioned, which was the role of engagement with society in responding to hurricanes. In the context of Haiti, how important is the role of society in responding, and how does your office work to build those relationships to prepare for, mitigate, and build resilience to disasters?
Absolutely, and the role of society is it's paramount, because if you do not have the buy-in of the people that that would be the beneficiaries of whatever efforts that you want to do, you will not go anywhere. So right now we do foster a relationship with the society at large. When I say at large, we were talking previously about disadvantaged groups. We were talking about the inclusion of these disadvantaged groups inside of our projects and inside of our programs. But we're also talking about working with the private sector, so we can make sure we assure business continuity. So the idea right now is to making sure that they are integrated inside of the response system and not look at them as a mean or resource. I mean, we just call them when we need them, so we're trying to change that paradigm so we can be in a different dynamic where they can be part of the general system. We're talking about this, and when we talk about the sectors also, we're talking about the various sectors where the people can get involved as voluntaries to actually help us strengthen the disaster management system, both at the response level, but also at the mitigation level. So yes, the relationship with the society, the civil society, is paramount, and it's key for the future of what we do. And again, like I said, in the recent events of August 14th, we have seen a tremendous effort, a tremendous inclusion and participation of the civil society at large, both the private sector, the NGOs, the sectors, religious sectors, and so forth and so on, that came on board, that proposed their help. Those that were not already on board with us came forward, proposed their help, and came in the emergency operation centers, so they could participate and bring in their competencies and their capacities. So again, it's a plus. And it is the conclusion to this is the fact that the inclusion of the civil society is paramount, and because we cannot do the work alone, we will never be able to achieve, what we're looking forward to. So again, we want to be sure that they're on board, they understand what they need to do, and they are cooperating. So we again make sure that inside of that big puzzle where you have the international community, the NGOs, the government, they can fit in and have their own role. Over.
So we're running out of time now. I'd like to make sure, though, that Dr. Samuda gets an opportunity to respond to this last question on the issue of the role of society and the role of private sector, and how the government works with those other segments of life in Jamaica to work to respond, mitigate, and prepare for disasters.
Thank you, Dr. Arias. I want to just underscore what Dr. Chandler said, so that the role of civil society is really paramount in our response, both emergency and beyond, thinking about building resilience. Sort of the access to networks for many of our partners in civil society, whether it's the religious groups, the service organizations, the emergency response groups, the private sector, is something that we absolutely need from a national or state perspective, that we have to leverage in our response. I do think it's also strategic that our emergency response, I guess, sort of umbrella response falls within the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. We recognize that sort of having that kind of approach, focusing on the community level, is important. So when we are conducting assessments such as hazard mapping and risk assessments, it's really done at the ground level in communities. If you visit our Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, our website, you'll see a lot of these community-based risk assessments that are available to the public for review. But we absolutely do have to leverage the role of civil society in mounting our emergency response, and also sort of leveraging their experience and their knowledge, and a lot of some of the research and a lot of the knowledge also takes place in civil society. So when we think about, as we start becoming more strategic in building resilience, leveraging that expertise that exists in academia, that exists with think tanks, for example, that exists with private sector organizations who may be doing work, cutting edge work in agriculture or something, that sort of creating partnerships that allow for that dissemination of knowledge is critical.
So I wanted to thank Dr. Samuda and Dr. Chandler for their participation today, as well as the audience for attending, but also I wanted to extend special thanks to Diana Lazov, Andrea Hundley, and Jason Epstein for their technical support and administrative support in organizing this event. These events would be impossible to run without the support of the staff here at the Marxe School. We are posting in the chat box a link to a Qualtrics survey, which would be great if everybody could respond to, so that we learn more about what you're looking for in our panels here at the Marxe School. And I also wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of an event that we're hosting next week, which is the Ackerman Lecture on November 10th, which is entitled Community Engaged Research and Social Justice, Lessons Learned from Labor and Youth Organizing, where we will have Dr. Veronica Terriquez speaking on those matters. So thank you so much for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a good afternoon.